Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the True North Report. I'm here in the newsroom. I am your friendly neighborhood knucklehead, and we are here to bring you the news of the day. We're going to be discussing a few different topics. We're going to be discussing Serena Williams, who had quite a memorable situation go down at the U.S. Open for tennis. We're going to be talking a little bit about Austria and what's going on there. We're also going to be discussing the violence that is in southern Ontario at the moment, and the Canadian government speaks one way when it comes to citizenship, but then implements something else. We're going to get into all those stories in just a minute. But the very first story I want to talk to you about is the fact that the Unifor Union has been facing criticism online for a video that they ended up putting out. This video was exposing who the scab workers were at the DJ Composites site after their union members were put on strike. For anybody who doesn't know, a scab worker is when a union goes on strike. Sometimes a business will hire on new temporary workers, usually at a fraction of their salary with very little benefits, if any, and they'll hire them on to do the work while the members are on strike. So, as you can imagine, many union members don't like scabs. But in this video that ended up going viral, and it was put out on all the big social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, they were essentially doxing the scab members. It was exposing their faces. It was exposing who they are. And anybody who is involved in any sort of online activity knows that one of the greatest taboos you can do online is to dox somebody. If someone wants to remain anonymous online, that is their prerogative. And one of the biggest weapons that people have against someone who's anonymous is to find out their personal information and threaten to expose it to the world. Many people have reasons in order to remain anonymous. This might just be for privacy. Some will do it because maybe their jobs would be at stake for some of the things that they talk about. But this is something that people have done since the internet has been started up, and it's something that the union has done. This is something that the union has just done in this video, and we're going to take a quick look into that video. Alrighty, there we go. Let's do it. So that was the video that was put out by the Unifor Union, and as it states there at the end, they've been locked out for 21 months. Now, clearly that when a union goes on strike, there's a possibility that a strike like this can go on for a long period of time. And for this one, it's almost 2 years. However, at some point, it also has to do with the fact that the union is not dealing at all with the business. Now, I only know very limited as to what's going down at this site at the moment, at this DJ Composites. It's taking place also in Gander, Newfoundland. But this was actually, many people could perceive this as a threat for them putting out their faces and their names because it makes them very easy to find. And it would make them very easy to find for people who wanted to get revenge on these people for crossing the picket lines. Unions have a lot of power inside of Canada, and they have a lot of power in many other countries around the world. And this idea that a group like this is going to put out these faces means that some goons could be showing up at these people's door anytime soon. This is actually something that has been people have been critical when it comes to unions for some times, is that unions can act like gangs these days. And I've even heard some personal stories from certain people who have talked about when they've gone against the union. There was one guy that I ended up talking to who used to be in a union back in his old job. And when he got into a bit of an argument with his union head, he actually literally almost got the crap beat out of him in that room. The only thing that stopped him was the fact that he was a union member. Pretty much the story that he ended up telling me was that he was getting in a fight with the union head, and the union head had a couple of big burly guys that were in the room with them. And after he said something that was kind of insulting to the union head, one of these guys started to make advances on him. And it was the union head who ended up stopping him, because he told this goon of his that it's like, for the moment, he's still one of us. So this is sort of the actions that many unions have taken in the past, and this is one of the reasons that many people are not happy with unions. It's because in certain professions, it's given them a lot of it's given the members a lot of ammo at the table, where they can pretty much do whatever they want, push around whoever they want, and it's completely justified. You can do a little more research onto unions themselves and sort of figure out a little more about them and how they have this, how they end up being able to have so much influence throughout the world and throughout in our own countries. And I recommend that everybody does. Unions in and of themselves aren't bad, but the way that unions conduct themselves these days, many unions, is in a negative way, and it doesn't give them favorable light. At the same time, one thing that tends to happen a lot of times is unions will encourage their members to vote in a certain way. So if one member of parliament or one politician, one party is more in favor for what lines up with the union beliefs and what the union wants, then they'll try and encourage their people in order to vote for them, for that party or that politician. And that can be also intimidating their members into doing so. There's plenty of stories of how people who have voted against what would be considered the best interests of the union have had to do so quietly, lest they risk getting in trouble with their union. And getting in trouble with their union could be a very painful experience. So the union is rightfully receiving a lot of lashback for putting out these people's names and faces, as they should, because what they have done is an absolutely disgusting tactic that people should not be doing. But unfortunately, in the world that we live in, this is just what's going to happen. So our next story, recently we've been hearing about who have been, for a long time, we've been having a lot of illegal immigrants crossing our border. And a lot of Canadians are unhappy with this, especially considering how many are given, as soon as they cross the border, they're given their welfare, they have access to Canadian medical care. And also many times they're being put up in these subsidized housings that is paid for by taxpayer dollars. And it's supposed to be to make housing a little more affordable for the citizens who need it. But because of this, people who are just entering the country are taking advantage of this, meaning that other Canadians cannot take advantage of this subsidized housing. And even the most recent thing that our government has been doing with these people crossing the border, has been that they've been putting them up in hotel rooms. And we've heard some pretty nasty stories of what's going on in there. People who are unhappy with their accommodations, so they've trashed their rooms, Bibles have gotten burned, furniture destroyed. Some people who work for the hotel have been getting intimidated by these people. It's not been a pleasant story that's going on. But the numbers have been put out recently about how many people who have crossed our borders have been deported, and you're going to be sorely disappointed. So as reported by the Star, Canadian border agencies have deported 398 illegal migrants out of 32,000. And if you'll notice in this article by the Star, they end up putting illegal migrants in quotation marks, as if it's supposed to be as if it's supposed to be illegitimate by using this term. When in fact, this is exactly what it is, what these people are doing. They are illegals crossing the border. This has been a narrative that many politicians have been trying to change by using terms such as irregular crossings, irregular migrants, but this is not the case. Also using the term refugees. And I personally, in my own life, have caught myself using the term refugees who are coming across the border, but this is not what the refugees are. I just did it again. These are not who these illegal migrants are. They are not true refugees because they're coming in from the United States. And first of all, the United States is a very prosperous country. Whether you like or hate Donald Trump, they're not in a situation where they need to run for their lives. When this first started happening, it was the Haitians, and the Haitians were crossing over because their temporary protective status was taken away from them by Donald Trump. But this was some 8-9 years after the earthquake that ended up happening in Haiti, and their country is still not going along very well. What's ironic too is the fact that people are fleeing the border trying to claim that Donald Trump is the reason that they're running away, when it has been more or less confirmed these days that it was Hillary and Bill Clinton and the Clinton Foundation who has been pocketing large sums of money that was supposed to go for the Haitian Relief Fund. But instead of the money finding its way to Haiti, it has instead been put inside their own pockets. So this is, first of all, the very ironic part about the whole situation. But on top of this, when this started happening with the Haitians, it was because their temporary protective status was taken away. Well, the key word in that phrase is temporary protective status, is the fact that it is not permanent. And if the temporary protective status is being taken away, you either have to return to your country or you have to go through the legal means of applying for residency inside the U.S. But instead of doing this, many Haitians uprooted themselves and came to Canada. This was after Justin Trudeau ended up putting out his tweet about how #welcome to Canada if you're fleeing persecution, blah, 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 blah. So this is what's been going on. And even so, since then, we've been hearing many stories about how many people have been going and getting a visa inside of America only to immediately travel to Canada and cross the border because they know they're not going to get sent back. And many Canadians are not happy about this. And the way that gets presented by both the politicians and by the news is that these are far-right activists who are against this illegal immigration, when that's not exactly true. Many standard Canadians, many regular Canadians are upset with the way that this has gone, with the way that this has been handled by the people in charge, by the Trudeau government, his ministry, and the politicians. The Trudeau government has a majority government, so they can pretty much push whatever they want. As long as the Liberals all vote together, they can push any law that they want, and there's nothing that the NDP or the Conservative Party can do about it. So it's been clear from the get-go that it's clear from the get-go that the Trudeau government really isn't trying to stop the people coming across the border at all, even though that in the past Trudeau has put out statements about how you need to follow the rules, even though that we have signs there that say that crossing there is an illegal crossing, even though we've sent politicians down to the U.S. to talk to people from these communities to tell them that Canada is not just open for people to cross over. There's a lot more that could be done by the Trudeau government that is not being done right now. And it even came out just a few weeks ago that our immigration minister, Ahmed Hussein, in a leaked email, I believe it may have been in a leaked document, but I'm pretty sure it was a leaked email, ended up saying about how the numbers of people crossing the border cannot be sustained. So even they know and are quite aware of what this is doing to us, but they are doing nothing about it. Probably one of the main reasons is because of is that they can't go against their masters, the Soroses, because we have Ahmed Hussein being pictured with George Soros' son. We have pictures of Justin Trudeau meeting with George Soros. Both, and they are involved in the Open Society Foundation. The whole idea is to rid people of their borders. The Soros are Marxists. They are socialists, so this is why they want to push for this sort of thing. But this is what we've been told so far, is that 398 illegal migrants have been deported out of the country out of 32,000. Now, I'm pretty sure this number of 32,000 is significantly lower than the actual numbers of people crossing. I'm pretty sure the numbers are upwards of 50,000, but many of our politicians are not pushing this number anymore. And I think one of the reasons is because if we knew the true number of 50,000, if that was being brought out, people would have an even bigger problem than if they knew the number was 32,000. So much of our taxpayer money is going to fund all these people coming across the border. It has cost hundreds of millions of dollars in order to care for these people, in order to give them their welfare checks, in order to give them housing, in order to look after themselves. It has taken a lot of time and money. Now, we also know that in Toronto, which has taken on the brunt of many of these illegal border crossers, we know that in the homeless shelters are reaching capacity to the point where the surrounding suburbs and smaller towns around the area and some of the other cities ended up reaching out and saying that they would start taking on some of the immigrants into their own homeless shelters. In fact, just a couple months ago, there was some stats that were put out, some raw data that you can go look up, and it ended up showing how there was about 50 at the time, I should say, 50% of the people in homeless shelters were illegal border crossers. By now, that number must be significantly higher. And I think I have that number saved somewhere, so I'll see if I can pull it up. And the thing is, too, is even though we have, almost 400 people that have been deported, we still have people who are coming across the border who are not the good people that we want here. For example, there was just a little while ago, we found out that there was a convicted child molester who crossed our border into Canada. And so he was running free in Canada for a while. That's not something that we want here. We absolutely do not want those sort of people making their way into our country. But this is what ends up happening with an open border society, is that you really don't have much option, and you have to you really don't have much of a choice of who comes across your border. It's absolutely ridiculous when this ends up happening. And I'm having some trouble finding those numbers, the data that I'm looking for at the moment. But you can go and look it up. I believe it was in a Globe and Mail, an article by the Globe and Mail a while ago. And it even got to the point, too, where they were starting to request that some Canadians take illegal border migrants into their own homes. That's a scary idea of just having these people come into your homes. We don't know who they are. We don't know what their history is like. And we're just going to welcome them into your homes. So as this article from the Star ends up saying, it says, nearly 400 people who crossed the U.S. border illegally for asylum in Canada have been deported since authorities began tracking irregular migration in April of last year. And there we go, them playing the narrative game right here. Because as we can see right there, they're talking about irregular migration. This is the exact same terminology that our prime minister has used, and they use this because they're trying to change your idea. They're trying to change the way you look at this situation. If they say illegal, a lot of people are not going to be happy with it. But if they say irregular migrants, then it gives them it changes the way that people think about the situation. The other thing I've noticed, too, is that in all these pictures, they always like showing families coming across the border, sort of like what we see here. We can see that there are a whole family coming across the border, and which is actually ironic, too. And we're going to point out about this photo in just a minute. But anyway, they like to show families coming together across the border. But what they never show you is how many single men are coming across the border. If you are going to have people who are criminals that come into your country to commit shit like this, it is going to be single men, more likely than it is by families coming across the border. The other thing that is very ironic about this whole situation is this guy right here, who is in the forefront of the photo with this sort of maroon style sweater. This guy right here happens to be this was about a month ago, I think it was, maybe a little bit more, maybe closer to 2 months. The Conservative Party of Canada ended up putting out a campaign slogan. So they ended up putting out like a picture that talked about, it showed this picture of a man crossing over Justin Trudeau's tweet and walking into Canada, pretty much talking about how Justin Trudeau was supporting was supporting like open borders and wasn't doing anything about it. And the Conservative Party got chastised for this. They got chastised for it for being racist and saying that the fact that they showed it as a black man crossing the border, when it was an actual photo of a man taken, and this is the guy right here. And now the Star is doing it, but they will not receive the same lashback as they would from the Conservative Party when they did that. As the article goes on, that number is a small fraction of the 32,173 so-called irregular migrants, using the term again, who came through unguarded land borders from the United States during the period ending in late August. Most are still waiting for their asylum claim to be heard. We've also heard that it takes about 2 years in order for this asylum claim in order to get processed. So it's going to be 2 years that they're here, probably living off the system while they wait for this. The problem is there's a good chance that the government is going to lose track of so many of these migrants, as they have done with about 50,000 of the Syrian refugees that we brought in a few years ago. The government has admitted that they've lost track of all these people, but now they're saying, let's bring in more. Let's bring in more people, and we'll wait the next 2 years in order for them to get their asylum claims processed. So we're probably going to lose track of many more of them. The other thing is in 2 years, if this is a sort of situation has stemmed more, who's going to remember that? The majority of Canadians are not going to remember that. These are the people that will fall through the cracks. Many of them will fall through the cracks in that we will forget about them. Nobody will bring it up again, except for the people who are paying attention to politics and recognize this as a failure on the Liberal government. Most people are not going to even think about this number anymore. Of the 398 failed refugee claimants Canada has deported, 146 were sent back to the U.S., where 116 of them have citizenship. So they have citizenship to the U.S., but they're crossing our border illegally. How grand. According to data provided by the Star by the Canada Border Service Agency, the rest were deported to 53 countries, with most sent to Haiti, 53, Colombia, 24, Turkey, 19, or Iraq, 15. So so that's where they're talking. This is the point we're at, and they also say their number comes from the Canada Border Service Agency. When we live in an age where everything is politicized, then absolutely we can't trust this number whatsoever. Because I think it's very likely that they've toyed with this number in a way that makes them look better, or it doesn't make the situation look as bad as it truly is. I mean, there was even an article in the Debate Post not too long ago. And it was talking about how one cop was talking about the politicization of the police force, about how he found it difficult in order to do his job simply because everything was so political. So certain things such as letting people go on crimes because they happen to come from a certain minority group, and they were worried about how that would look on the world stage. And I think I have it here. Yeah, here it is. Nope, don't want to move that. Oh, here we go. Debate Post. Candidate called to explain allegations of political interference in policing. A Star candidate claimed that he'd experienced political interference when he was a police officer made waves on the Quebec campaign trail on Sunday as members of the opposing parties called on Ian Lafreniere to clarify his remarks. Lafreniere, a longtime Montreal police spokesman and current Coalition Avenir Quebec candidate, told TVA on Saturday that the thing he hated most about being a police officer was the political interference, though he did not go into details about the allegation. And this came out on September 2nd of this year. So if there's political interference if there's political interference inside of our police forces, and each one is a separate entity, each department, they fall underneath similar regulations and bigger government committees. But all in all, they're their own independent departments. then we can definitely assume that the Canadian border officers who are a federally funded organization definitely are having the exact same problems that the police force was having. Just to quickly finish up on a couple of the stats from the previous article from the Star. Deportees, 48 of which were under the age of 17, include 238 males and 160 females, said the Border Enforcement Agency. Yep. So this is the point we're at in Canada when we come to the border crossings. It's getting out of control, and there's not much that is being done about it. So and there's nothing that can really be done for another year or so, because the election's not coming up till then. And even though many Canadians are supporting the idea of Justin Trudeau stepping down because he's not doing a good job, despite this, it only matters. The only way you can do this is if the Liberal Party itself votes for a new leader. Because in Canada, one thing that a lot of people don't realize, but when you vote for who's going to be the next prime minister, you're not actually voting for that prime minister. You vote for the party who's going to be in charge. You're electing your members of parliament, and whichever government has the most votes, they get in, which makes the leader of that party the prime minister. So if the party itself is unsatisfied with its leader, they can actually vote in order to have that leader removed from their position, and then somebody else who is part of a member of parliament be installed inside as the prime minister. So removing the prime minister of Canada is not super difficult. It's removing the party that is super difficult. But again, you can only remove the prime minister of Canada with the consent of the party that is the ruling party. But as we can tell, Trudeau runs his party with an iron fist. So this is not what's going to happen. We're not going to see anything of the sort when it comes to trying to remove Prime Minister Trudeau from power. So this story has been making waves on social media right now. And has to do with Serena Williams' conduct in the U.S. Open. She ended up getting fined $17,000 because of what she's done. And we have a quick video right here for you. If it'll ever load. But pretty much, she broke the rules.
Well, TSN's Mark Rowe joins me from the U.S. Open in New York. Thank you, Mark. A lot to talk about here. Your thoughts on the chair umpire's first call. Was it justified?
Well, letter of the law, absolutely, when it comes to the coaching violation. And it's, it's right in the rule book. And this is something that they've softened a little bit. You're seeing some coaching during qualifying for a tournament like this or on the WTA Tour. But you can't coach during a Grand Slam. And Patrick Mouratoglou, who's Serena Williams' coach, admitted to that. He also said that, he's doing the exact same thing that every other coach does, which it really is true. But it's kind of like saying, well, I was speeding, but everybody speeds, so I shouldn't get a ticket. Yeah, it is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that the 3 code violations happened. Most of us believe that Serena Williams wasn't receiving any coaching because of just the proximity of her and her coach and where she was on the court. But and why it had to happen at that time, why it had to happen in a women's championship match. But he has every right to call what he did. And that started the chain reaction of code violations, which eventually cost her both a point and then a game.
And, well, she was also calling this a double standard here, saying that if a man had been having the same type of outburst, there would be not such an extreme penalty, but she's being penalized. We know that she was fined $17,000. So any thoughts on that in terms of what she's saying there?
Yeah, and, there's a lot of arguments that really strengthens her stance on that. And we have seen male players berate officials, say some things that I can't really say on live television right now. And, I think she has every right to bring that up. And, there are obviously both sides of the argument here. And people have criticized Serena a little bit in terms of let her kind of getting too emotional during the match, and it didn't help her case. But maybe there's a bigger picture here, and she was standing for something much larger, for the next female athlete, and someone who has a strong voice both in the sport, but also just in pop culture and in sports as well. So maybe this does more good long term than it did in last night's match, which she ends up losing to Naomi Osaka.
Well, I think there's going to be a lot more to talk about this. Of course, not to forget a huge win for Naomi Osaka, making.
So first of all, this guy that we have on screen, this fucking cuck from TSN, couldn't even bring himself to talk about what really happened. Because the thing is while they bring up a point talking about how, well, if a man had done this, it probably wouldn't have been so severe, and how other men have berated officials. Yes, absolutely, it happens. No one is denying that. But there are plenty instances where this happens and people do get in trouble. They get penalized or they get fined. In fact, I believe it's John McEnroe, who is another well-known tennis player, for a male tennis player. He has been fined many different times and penalized many different times for these same actions. But they don't end up bringing that up. And at the same time, the things that Serena Williams ended up saying and things that she tried to claim were absolutely horseshit. So what ended up happening was that Serena Williams she ended up getting what was said to be a thumbs up from her coach. And now, while the tennis game is going on, you cannot give any sort of, you cannot help them in any sort of way. What you have to do is have to remain completely silent. It's sort of the idea that it's you versus the other person out there, and you're not allowed any coaching. So first of all, the thumbs up goes up from her coach, and she acknowledged it, and then she got penalized for it because this is not what you're supposed to do, and she got into a bit of an argument with the umpire. Now, it has been confirmed that Serena Williams' coach, while speaking to ESPN, ended up saying that, yeah, he was coaching in that situation, and they had every single right in order to penalize her for it. The next one was that Serena Williams ended up smashing her racket. If I'm remembering correctly, this had to do with the fact that she had done a bad serve, and she ended up smashing her racket, which got her penalized yet again, and that got her penalized by 1 point. Now, the thing is about that, too, actually, is a lot of people have been talking about how this could be considered sort of a strategy that is used by some players in order to pretty much delay the game. By smashing your racket, it takes time in order for you to bring the old racket back. You have to go get a new one. You need to get set back up. And it can give the players the breather that they may be looking for. So it's really very clearly defined in the rules that breaking your racket like that, smashing your racket, is an unacceptable technique. So this is something that Serena Williams was getting, that she got pissed off when she got penalized for this, and she ends up going to the judge where she pretty much starts talking about how it's the fact that she's a woman this is happening, and that she's out here trying to fighting for equality and for women's rights, and that it would never have happened if it was a man who ended up who was playing. But she also berated him and getting very personal with him. I'm kind of blanking on what it exactly she said. She ended up calling him a thief at one point, pretty much saying that she stole a point from him, then stole after he penalized her again. She got penalized 1 game. You have to play 6 games in tennis, and you have to beat him by two games. So because she lost the game, she accuses the umpire of being a thief and stealing it from her. And then she goes on to say that it has to do with the fact that she's a woman. Well, this is an absolutely ridiculous point of view that she has taken on. And the thing about it is that while people are defending her over this, as we could see that the one guy was doing, that TSN cuck, while he was defending her and talking about she was making great points, my question is, what has Serena Williams actually done for women's rights? She plays a game, and she's done very well at the game. She's a very skilled tennis player. But how is that fighting for women's rights and women's equality? And if it does see herself as a champion of women's rights and women's equality, then why has she in the past berated some females who have been involved in the game terribly? She ended up threatening to sue one female, I believe it was a female umpire at the time, back in 2011 it was. Oh, no, I think that one was back in 2009. And back in 2011, she ended up threatening to shove a ball down a woman's throat. I believe it was one of the a women working the sidelines. But she is clearly not like she was. This is a problem with her ego. This is a problem with her anger. It has nothing to do with the fact of her being a woman, but she is using this as an excuse in order to deflect from herself. Instead of taking personal responsibility for her actions, she's trying to present it that she is being discriminated against simply because she's a woman. It's a miracle that the fact she didn't play the race card too, that she didn't say that it was because she was black as well that she ended up having this happen to her. And the thing is too, which I find even more disgusting, is that her opponent ended up winning the match over her, Naomi Osaka. But because of the way that Serena Williams acted and because of all the attention that brought on, Naomi couldn't enjoy her win. If you've seen the video of her when she's supposed to be being presented as the winner of the US Open, she looks devastated. She looks like she's embarrassed to be up on that stage and doesn't want to be there. This is all because of what Serena Williams has done. So it's absolutely, I personally find her actions in this disgusting. I think that she should be ashamed of herself, and she rightfully did deserve the fines. In fact, the calls that were made against her were reviewed after the game, and all three of those calls made by the umpire were held up by the league, meaning that they saw what he saw, and they ended up ruling on side with him, saying that he made the right decision in all three of those situations. So there's no reason that Serena Williams can blame this on the fact that she's a woman and she's being discriminated against, because the league has also upheld the umpire's ruling. But if you, depending where you look, you'll find different points of view on this. If you're going towards more of the right wing points of view, of course, they're kind of shitting on her for this. But if you go to certain other ones, such as CBC, they're the ones talking about how there's a double standard in tennis. No, there isn't a double standard. There are people who get away with this stuff, but it happens on all ends of the spectrum. It'll happen if you're a woman. It'll happen if you're a man. Some of them will get away with this stuff. Others won't. And then Serena Williams goes on about how a woman who gets mad is hysterical, while the same thing isn't applied to... the same standard isn't applied to a man. Now, this does happen. I'll be the first one to admit this. And one place where I did see this was in that video of the woman who was heckling Trudeau at the last month at the at his Quebec rally, where she ended up she was calling on him to answer about the 140, whether he was going to refund the 146 million to the Quebec for that they had spent on these illegal migrants, and then saying, does he support old stock Quebecers? And then as soon as she got dragged out by the RCMP goons, as soon as she gets dragged out, the cop starts talking about how she is hysterical when she really wasn't in that situation, and she called him out for it, talking about how he's saying that she's hysterical simply because she's a woman. That was one situation where I absolutely saw that as being the case, because that woman was not being hysterical. Serena Williams' actions were disgusting. And I'm not going to sit here too much on my high horse. I used to play sports, and it's not like I didn't have a few bad interactions similar to what Serena Williams done, although I've never played tennis. My sports were soccer and hockey. So I will say that I'm guilty of hysterical actions on the rink and on the soccer field as well. I'm not exactly the poster child when it comes to this sort of thing. But it doesn't have anything to do with Serena Williams being a woman. It has everything to do with the type of person that she is, her massive ego, her absolutely enormous, massive ego. And she deserved that fine that she got. There's no way around it. Because the other thing is too, is it's not a democracy on when it comes to sports like that. When you're playing a sport, the referees have the authority on the ice, or if that happens to be on the field, depending on what your sport is, but the referees have final say. Now, you can challenge what the referee said, and you can go and plead your case to the refs. That's absolutely fine. But at the end of the day, when the decision is made by the referee, whether they uphold their decision or they overturn their decision, that is what ends up happening. And your only course of action after that is to go to the league once everything's said and done, once the game is done, and try and get that rectified. But this is not what Serena Williams did whatsoever. And she's been playing the game long enough to know better. All right. What's going to be our next story of the day? All right. Let's get a little bit more into the violence that we're seeing in southern Ontario. I think I'll have to do that. Yeah, that's good. So this article from Debate Post ended up coming out on September 6th, 2018, and it talked about how there were multiple people who were rushed to hospital after being shot in St. Catharines. St. Catharines is not far from Niagara Falls. Probably, it's also not far from Toronto, where we've been seeing a lot of the violence taking place. All right, but as this article goes on to say, multiple people have been rushed to hospitals after a shooting in St. Catharines, Ontario, police said Thursday, as they dealt with what they called an ongoing situation. Niagara Regional Police said they were dealing with multiple shooting scenes in the downtown area of the city west of Toronto. Constable Phil Gavin tweeted that police were called to the intersection of Church Street and Niagara Street at around 3:45 Thursday afternoon, and said the nearby intersection of Queenstone Street and Geneva Street was also affected. We arrived on scene to find multiple shooting victims, he wrote in a tweet, without specifying exactly how many were involved. The victims have been transported by Niagara EMS to area hospital. Gavin said numerous officers, the K9 unit, and emergency responders are all on scene. And to make the matters worse, this was not the end of when it came to this shooting, because despite the fact this shooting happened, the suspects remain outstanding after St. Catharines shooting injures 3. So, as it says, police searched into the night for 2 armed men following a daytime shooting in St. Catharines, Ontario. On Thursday, that sent 3 people to hospital, 2 of them in life-threatening conditions. Niagara Regional Police said officers were looking at a number of residents in a downtown area of the city of Toronto in what they described as a slow, methodical process. Constable Phil Gavin said late Thursday that officers were still looking for 2 men behind the ages of 19 and 23 who were wearing hoodies and jeans. Quote, our detectives will be continuing the investigation overnight, Gavin wrote in a series of tweets just before midnight. The suspect remains outstanding. And as far as I know, these suspects still have not been picked up. They still don't know who did this or where they are, which is a dangerous thing to do. It's a dangerous to have these sort of people out and about in the public right now, because this will happen again. And this has been something that... And this has been sort of a problem that we've been facing in Southern Ontario for some time. And not just Southern Ontario. It wouldn't be fair to just single them out. But in all cities across Canada right now, we're seeing a large amount of violence that has taken place. It just happens to be in areas such as Toronto, where so much of the violence is taking place right now. But even in some of the surrounding suburbs, they're having a lot of problems at the same time. But while all this is going on, what is Mayor John Tory's biggest concern that he has when it comes to Toronto? Despite again, I am aware that this is St. Catharines we're talking about, but Toronto is right now on track to beat out every other record when it comes to homicides and shootings this year. The numbers are absolutely atrocious. But when it comes to Toronto, what is Mayor John Tory's biggest concern? Noisy streetcars. I'm not kidding you. John Tory's biggest concern right now is noisy streetcars, and he wants to put an end to them. There is literally a war going on in Toronto right now. A number of residents have talked about how they don't feel safe being in busy areas anymore because they're worried that something is going to happen. And in case you thought I was lying or kidding, I'm not kidding. Mayor John Tory calls for crackdown on noisy vehicles. Offending drivers should be fined heavily for causing disturbance. This came out on September 3rd, 2018. We're not going to get into this article because I really don't care that much about that. I care about the violence that is taking place. And those who report from Toronto are also talking about how there's just constantly there are police cars that are showing up everywhere because shootings take place. A number of them, people just keep getting away. And the numbers that you can look up for Toronto right now, like I said just a few minutes ago, are absolutely atrocious. I'm going to pull them up real quickly. This really won't take me long. So Toronto, while many times in the past I've equated Toronto to being the New York City of Canada, we're at the point now where Toronto really all it is Toronto is now the Chicago of Canada. And that's because there are constantly, despite the heavy restrictions on firearms inside of Chicago, there is so much gang violence that takes place all the time. There's so much violence, and there's just, they can never put a stop to it. And this is exactly what we're facing now in Toronto. So as we can see here, this is year-to-date homicides, 73. We have 73 homicides already this year, and if we look at the previous numbers, sure, the number went down back in 2017 from it was only 36, but 54, 41, 54 in 2016, 41 in 2013, but this is an unprecedented number. Unprecedented, and the summer months have been god awful. These are you can see them right here, homicides by month. As we got into April, they were 13, May 10, June 13, July 9, August 12, already 2 in September. Holy shit, guys. This is absolutely an abomination when it comes to Canada. I mean, people for a long time have held up Canada and its gun laws as being exceptional, and this is why Canada is such a safe place to live. But this isn't the case anymore. Right now, people are being killed in Toronto, and this is all due to the gang warfare that's taking place. And there's also even a number of terrorist attacks that have also led to this situation. And then we're going to take a look at the shootings per year. So here we are, and shootings per year. We have, as we can see, from 2014, we've more than doubled our amount of shootings that have taken place. More than, about that. We've doubled our shootings in 4 years, and we've also had a huge rise in the number of victims for these shootings. The blue is the count of occurrences, the amount of shootings, and the sort of pinkish one is the count of victims. So these numbers are not looking good right now. This is exactly what I've been talking about. You can also see these for yourself. You can go look them up. The one thing about Toronto is the Toronto police actually keep pretty good raw data when it comes to the crimes that take place. Not every single crime, but a lot of crimes that end up taking place. So, and these numbers still need to be updated because they're updated every Sunday. And the last one they were talking about was September 2nd, 2018. So you can actually go onto the Toronto website itself and look these up. Let's see. Yeah, there's this website right here. Toronto Public Safety. I just type in Toronto Police Data, and you can find this data yourself. It's good to go by and take a look. The data from a lot of other cities are not nearly as well kept as this. So I find it's a good, for Toronto, it's a good place to go to when you're looking for this sort of data. Especially because Toronto is one of our most inhabited, I think it is actually the most inhabited city that we have in Canada right now. But just continuing on this about this, talking about how the amount of violence is going on in Toronto, a 16-year-old was arrested after a deadly shooting in Toronto flea market. So it says here, a 16-year-old has been arrested after a shooting in Toronto's West End that left one man dead Saturday afternoon. So today is the 9th, Sunday, the 9th of September. So this took place on the 8th of September. Police were called to Toronto's West Flea Market for a report of shooting around 3:30 p.m. and say that when they arrived, they found a victim without vital signs. Paramedics say he was later pronounced dead at the scene. And we'll just check this out. Quick video from CTV. If it decides to load.
Today on September 8th, 2018 at 3:33 p.m., members of the Toronto Police Service responded to a call for service, a shooting located at Old Weston Road, flea market located at 404 Weston Road in the City of Toronto. Upon arrival, officers located a 65-year-old male who had been suffered from a gunshot wound. The deceased has been identified as Rocco Scavita, an employee of the flea market. I can confirm to you today, as of right now, a 16-year-old young person has been arrested, a weapon has been recovered, and we are not looking for any further suspects at this time. The youth cannot be identified as per the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and we are very much at our preliminary stages of our investigation. We are requesting assistance from the community and asking any witnesses who may have been at the flea market during those hours or during that time, may have seen or heard anything, to please contact Toronto Police Service Homicide Squad. 416-808-7400.
And that is live at 12 Divisions. Toronto Police provide an update regarding this afternoon's homicide, Old Weston Road in St. Clair. Police say Rocco Sabita, 65 years old. He was an employee at the flea market. He is the deceased. They have taken into custody and laid charges against a 16-year-old. The weapon was recovered. They say they're not looking for anyone else at this time. And as the person is 16 years old, they're charged under the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and that person cannot be identified.
So I get the feeling that this is not the last we're going to be hearing about these sort of situations where we have youths committing crimes such as this. This is something that is not unique in the world, where we have young underage people who commit crimes like this, but I do believe that this is something that we're going to see rising throughout Canada from now on, that people under the age of 18 are now going to be seen committing more of these shootings, and it's most likely gang related. It's most likely gang related. And the thing is, I can't help but feel that for this kid, this 16-year-old kid, it was him being, it was some sort of initiation for him into the gang life, that he had to go out and do this, but he ended up getting caught. Now, in this article, they didn't actually specify whether, it was, what type of gun was being used. I wouldn't be surprised if it was a handgun. But if you all remember the data that I just showed you for Toronto, if I'm remembering what I saw correctly, it's at 72 homicides per year. But as this article goes on to clarify, this is actually the city's 74th homicide of the year. This is because the data for the Toronto Police Force is only updated every Sunday evening. So they haven't updated this information yet to say that it was 74 homicides that have been taking place. But we need to get this situation under control immediately. If we don't get this situation under control, then we're going to be hearing more and more of these shootings taking place. And also, another thing that I can't help but feel, that considering how Toronto has been classified as a sanctuary city, it is probably, I can't help but feel that a lot of this violence comes from certain groups in the community. And this is the problem when it comes to this is the problem when it comes to this is the problem when it comes to sanctuary cities, is that if you're just going to let anybody in, then if you're just going to let anybody in with pretty much without any sort of vetting, then all you're going to end up is a bunch of people who come in and are going to commit the crimes, especially if they're people who feel that they are, if they live in bad areas where it's easy for them to get involved in gangs and crimes, then then this is going to be something that we're just going to keep on seeing the rise of. But this is the problem right now when it comes to Toronto, is we just have a huge amount of violence that is going on, and nobody is doing anything really to stop it. I mean, I guess for me, when I look at what Doug Ford wants to do, and whether you dislike or like the guy, the one thing that Doug Ford wants to do is he wants to put more money towards solving the gang issue in Toronto. So for those who remember that at the beginning, I ended up talking about how the government, our current Liberal government, the Trudeau government, says one thing when it comes to citizenship, but then completely does the opposite when it comes to legislation. This is due to a report that came out just yesterday, September 8th, 2018. And it says that birthplace doesn't necessarily guarantee citizenship, feds tell Supreme Court. International law does not require Canada to give citizenship to babies born on its soil, the federal government is telling the Supreme Court, an argument that could inadvertently bolster a recent Conservative Party resolution aimed at stemming so-called birth tourism. And what birth tourism is that people will come to Canada in a means of being tourists, but they'll schedule it for when they're either the woman will schedule it on her own, or the family, the husband and wife, will schedule it right as about the time when the woman is about to give birth. So that way she gives birth on Canadian soil, and then their kid can be considered a Canadian citizenship. So they can have a foot into the country without having to go through the legal immigration system. Canada is one of fewer than 3 dozen countries that follow the practice of citizenship based on birthplace, and some, including Australia and Britain, have modified or ended automatic birth rights in recent years. The government says, the government says, where the hell was I? I just lost it. The government says in a case that will determine whether the Toronto-born sons of Russian spies are Canadian citizens. Quote, indeed, no European countries, for example, grant an unqualified amount of citizenship by birth, and they have no obligation to do so, end quote, the federal submission says. Only 34 countries grant automatic acquisition of citizenship through birthplace, regardless of parents' nationality or status. This practice is not consistent and uniform enough to ground a rule of customary international law. The federal Liberals adopted a slightly different tone recently after the Conservatives passed a policy resolution calling on the government to enact legislation to end birthright citizenship. Quote, unless one of the parents of the child born in Canada is a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. So any illegal immigrants who are here, or anybody who's coming in as tourists and then just to have their kid to be able to stay on the country, this would no longer be allowed. And this is actually a very good idea in order to do. But the reason that it is so that I say that it is so different than what the Trudeau government has talked about in the past is because, if you'll remember from the Monks debate, back when Trudeau was running running his campaign, he ended up saying this.
Terrorist attacks against this country. A Canadian is a Canadian, and you devalue the citizenship of every Canadian in this place and in this country when you break down and make it conditional for anyone. We have the rule of law in this country, and you can't take away citizenship if you don't like what someone does. You can't do that.
So apparently Trudeau is changing his tune when it comes to this idea of a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. And this is the sort of thing that he chastises the Conservative Party over when they bring this sort of thing up. They're using it to, they're also trying to use this to their advantage when it comes to the legal border crossers right now. But then when it comes down to the actual legislation, they're telling the Supreme Court right now that the idea of birth tourism should not be allowed, and that just because you're born on Canadian soil, that you do not have a right to, you don't necessarily have the right of citizenship unless one of your parents is a citizen or they are permanent residents of Canada. Now, I actually support this idea. I don't believe that just because your child is born on Canada's soil, that immediately qualifies them for citizenship. I think there has to be a process, and it's so easy of a loophole in order to get around. There's so many loopholes in our system that people like to exploit. Like one example where something people exploit when it comes is they'll come to Canada, they'll go through the whole process of getting their citizenship, and then they'll return to their countries. But the reason they get their citizenship in Canada is to use the medical system. So there's plenty of situations where people will come in, become a citizen, return to their country of origin, and stay there until they get sick. Then they come back to Canada and use the medical system. They go to hospitals in order to treat themselves. So this is just one way that this example is it's being exploited, and this one that we have right here, the birth tourism, is an example of how our citizenship system is being exploited right now. So I actually support this motion, this idea that just because you're born on Canadian soil does not automatically make you. It just doesn't automatically give you the right to have a citizenship in Canada. There's been some, when it comes to Austria, there's been some controversial things that have been going on right now, which some people will, and some people will end up liking this. Some other people will end up hating this. Oop, 1 second. I'm just looking for something real quick before I continue on this. Here we go. All right. So in this article that came out in the debate post, it says, Austria declares war on Islam, deports 60 imams, destroys 7 mosques. Austria closed 7 mosques and expelled up to 60 Turkish-funded imams and their families as a part of a crackdown on political Islam. Interior Minister Herbert Kickl said on Friday, sparking outrage in the Muslim world. 150 Muslims, religious leaders, clerics, and imams risk losing their rights to residence. The action by the government are based on a 2015 law that, amongst other things, prevents religious communities from getting funding from abroad. And there's this I agree too when it comes to a law that says that these sort of religious communities cannot receive funding abroad, because there is this one way that when it comes to the radicalization that happened in mosques, this is an easy way to do it, that other countries or other groups can fund these mosques in order to push a radicalized agenda, and this can also help lead to more terrorist attacks that happen on our soil right now. So that was really mostly what was covered in this. And that looks like this video, I think, is in a different language, but we can quickly check this out and see.
Austria va a expulsar del país a decenas.
Yeah, it's in a different language, so I don't understand it. I'm sure you all don't. But the reason that this is going on, and the reason that there seems to be a lot of countries now these days that are pretty much doing a war against Islam, is because of what tends to happen a lot whenever Islam becomes a very dominant religion and culture inside of these respected countries, is they always have a clash, culture warfare. This happens in so many countries right now, and even though this can happen just with about any single culture that ends up coming into a foreign country, it seems to be indicative of Islam right now. And there's a few different ways. One reason, too, is because it seems that Muslims don't want to adapt to the country itself. They don't want to integrate themselves into the country. Again, I'm talking generalities right now. I'm not speaking for every single Muslim. There are people who come in just because they want to be here and they're happy to be here and be part of the culture. But when we're talking in generalities right now, this seems to be the problem that people have when they have a large Muslim population inside of their countries. And we have a few examples right now from Europe where this is happening. in this article from the Daily Mail, it says Subway removes ham and bacon from nearly 200 stores and offers halal meat only after strong demand from Muslims. One second. Being a little choppy right now. There we go. Fast food giant Subway has removed ham and bacon from almost 200 outlets and switched to halal meat alternatives in an attempt to please its Muslim customers. It has confirmed turkey ham and turkey rashers will be used instead in 185 of its stores, where all the meat will now be prepared according to halal rules. The chain, which has around 1,500 outlets across the UK, explains its decision by saying it had to balance animal welfare concerns with the views of religious communities. Traditional halal slaughter sees animals have their throats slit before bleeding to death. But Subway stresses that the meat served in sandwiches would come from animals that have been stunned first, a practice which aims to reduce any suffering. In Arabic, the word halal means permitted or lawful and defines anything that is allowed or lawful according to the Quran. It is often used to indicate food, particularly meat, has been prepared in accordance with Muslim principles and techniques. Well, the thing is despite the fact that they talk about that Subway is saying that these animals are being stunned instead of just having their throat slit, it is still a brutal way in order for an animal to be killed the halal way. And you just need to look at the recent Eid festival that took place at the end of August in order to see this sort of abuse that these animals face. I mean, I don't want to sit up here on my soapbox too much to talk when we have our own problems here in the West in the way that we do. We slaughter our animals. In these sort of commercialized slaughterhouses, they're treated quite badly. No, we can't deny that. But the thing is if you're going to go to the average farmer and get your stuff from a more independent slaughterhouse, then they do tend to treat them much better. But when it comes to the idea of halal meat, these animals, they take a knife, they slit the throat of the animal, and the animal thrashes around until it's finally dead. So putting aside the idea of putting this aside, this is a problem in and of itself, especially because we have conditions. Over here in the West, there are regulations and laws that need to be followed by slaughterhouses, that need to be followed by other people who are going to be killing animals in order for food. This is going against these regulations, but it's not being enforced by any government right now or any government organization that's going to oversee to ensure that the proper practices are taking place. This is showing how the Muslim community over in the UK are actually they're not trying to assimilate to the culture, but instead are trying to change the way that things are done inside that culture, inside that country, the UK right now, in order to be more accommodating to themselves. Now, there are plenty of areas where people can go and get halal meat. They absolutely can. But instead of going to these areas, they are instead using these. They're using this halal. They're using Subway and forcing them to change the way that they do business. So you can't get ham or actual bacon anymore, despite the fact that still the majority of the population of the UK, this is the type of food that they eat. This is not adapting to the society right now. It's quite the opposite. It's the opposite, where they're trying to change the culture in order to appease themselves, and this is not the proper way to go about it, and this is one reason why people are having so much lashback when it comes to the Muslim populations. And let's not forget that over the last few months, we've been hearing a lot about the Muslim grooming gangs that are out there, and I'm using the politically correct term, the Muslim rape gangs, which have gone around and kidnapped, raped, and murdered more than 1,000 girls. Not all of them end up getting murdered, but there are a number of times where the women who were kidnapped were murdered. Sometimes these girls that ended up getting kidnapped were as young as, I think the youngest I heard was 11, at least 13 years old, I've heard. So these are the problems that they end up having, along top with more terrorist attacks that are taking place inside of the UK right now. Even when it comes to what's going on with the Rohingya Muslims, is everyone's talking about how it is absolute slaughter over there and how it's a genocide. The thing is about that, though, is the fact that their large amount of the Muslim population have actually been fighting back against the local population, but nobody's been discussing that right at the moment. I'm not saying that what is going to happen to the Rohingya Muslims is acceptable if you're going to genocide this population, but the point is that ironically enough, actually, before I continue, is Nikki Haley, who is the U.S. representative to the UN, who is a Zionist through and through. She ended up talking about this when it came to Rohingya Muslims and talked about how it's a genocide going on. Ironic, considering how there's a lot of problems in Israel and Palestine right now, but she refuses to talk about that. But the thing is that the way that the media presents the Rohingya crisis right now is they're presenting as if the Muslims haven't done anything and then now they're being genocided by the local population, when they more or less started a war against the local population, and then the local population started fighting back, and there's plenty of problems that are going on there. There's plenty of different ways that could be handled so much better, but it's not as cut and dry as the media likes to present it to be. And then we even have this article here from Jihad Watch. And I've heard, somebody told me a while ago that Jihad Watch, even of itself, could be funded by Israel or something like that. I'm not 100%. But as it stands, I'm going to use Jihad Watch in order to make my point. But this article came out back in May 22nd, 2018, and it says how Germans may be forced to work into their 70s to pay for the Muslim migrants on welfare. And they actually provided numbers here. On top of it, they're right off the bat, they start talking about Germany's economy slowing down, and 50% of elderly and pensioners are now categorized at poverty level. They have some... here we go. So this originally came out. Germans could need to work until their 70s to pay for hundreds of thousands of refugees on welfare, by Ben Percheron from Voice of Europe in May 16th, 2018. But as the numbers go on, it says, in February 2016, Professor Matthias Lucke of Kiel University calculated the cost would be 25.7 billion euros for German taxpayer funds. The cost would rise to 37 billion euros in 2017 and soar to 55 billion euros by 2022. Just 5 months later, another economist, Dr. Bernd Rafhuschen, has calculated the total amount of debt incurred to pay for the mainly Arab, 70% unskilled migrants would balloon to 1.5 trillion euros over their stay in Germany. By February 2017, Merkel's own economic advisor, Hans-Werner Sinn, was warning that the total cost could reach 340 billion euros, almost 10% of the Germans' total GDP that year. And that same year, a study came out showing that these refugees are not waiting for their countries to end its war, but are planning to stay permanently in Europe. So along with in several areas, the rape gangs that are going around, along with the increased terrorist attacks, along with the culture war, along with the unwilling to adapt to the culture they come into, and along with using the welfare system in order to fund themselves, these are all areas that people are having problems with the Muslim population. And it's absolutely fucking horrendous that this is a situation it's gone to, but it makes sense now when a lot of people now are not crazy about importing people from the Middle East when they want to import more people of the Muslim faith, because now they're especially people over here in the more Western countries such as America or Canada. In certain areas in Europe, such as maybe Hungary, or I believe Poland is the other one that has refused to take on any of the economic migrants that ended up happening since like 2015, the mass migration that ended up happening. So this is really becoming a problem where where people are no longer wanting to take even immigrants, like legal immigrants, from these areas, from the Muslim faith, because they're worried about what the outcome is going to be. This is also the problem when it comes to countries such as America, when they have such a strong alliance with a place like Israel, because Israel does not take on any any refugees, and any that they have taken on, they usually end up exporting them later, treating them as severely. I don't even think second-class citizens appropriate. Even third-class citizens would probably be more appropriate. And it even ended up was released a while ago. Is that it turns out that when it came to African Jews that were coming into Israel, they ended up using vaccines, which the vaccines that they were saying was just because of disease and everything like that. But what they did is they sterilized the African Jews that ended up coming in because they didn't want them to breed. I'll see if I can look that up right now. Yeah, I think I found something. This is from Forbes magazine. Israel forcibly injected African immigrants with birth control, reports claim. And this came out, when was this? January 28th, 2013. This weekend, a report revealed that African women immigrating to Israel were subjected to mandatory contraceptive injections, effectively amounting to forced, if temporary, sterilization, made global headlines. Some 130,000 Ethiopians, most of them Jewish, live in Israel. The community experienced higher poverty and unemployment rates than the rest of the country's Jewish population. In the past decade, the birth rates among Ethiopian Israelis has declined by at least 20%. Advocacy groups now claim that this decline is the result of birth control regimen forced upon Ethiopian immigrant women. So this is what Israel does. But then Israel is constantly going to war with its neighbors all the fucking time. They're making strikes here, strikes there, and even and it's leading to more war. And because of this war leading to more war, it's leading to more immigrants and like refugees who are fleeing their country, but they always get forced into the West. They always go into Europe. They always go to America. They always come to Canada. So this is the problem when countries have such a strong alliance with the Israelis, because the Israelis are just looking right now for reasons to go to war, and then they don't take on any of the refugees. I mean, it was Benjamin Netanyahu who recently ended up talking about how they rescued like more than 200 white helmets from Syria. Oh, but you know what? They're going to places like Canada and the UK because you guys asked for them. You take the white helmets. Now, the thing is about the white helmets is the white helmets are not who they present themselves to be. The white helmets are seen as this group that is in Syria trying to help the civilian population there, when this is not the case. They are actually aligned with al-Nusra, and al-Nusra is an associated group of Al-Qaeda, the terrorist group. So they are a terrorist group, and there's even some stuff you can look up talking about how the white helmets are actually helping these groups to commit some terrible actions. Let's see. White helmets. Just looking up right now. And one of and one thing is that even in the documentary that was released within the last couple of years, that's available on Netflix about the white helmets. The one thing about that is there's one scene where the white helmets are it's showing them after they've done their business and they're staying in their whatever they were staying at for the evening, and they were trying to build a fire. They talked a little bit about how the Wi-Fi was out, but right behind them, you can see that they have hanging. It was either a flag or a picture of the ISIS symbol. It's absolutely fucking ridiculous. But did Israel end up taking on the white helmets? No, they ended up seeking them out to. They ended up sending them out to over here to Canada, to the UK. I think was another one, and I think even France was another country that was going to take on these white helmets. But never Israel. Israel never takes on any real refugees. And if they do, it's only temporarily, because sooner or later they end up getting evicted out of the country. I had something else about the white helmets that I was going to talk about, but I think I am. Yeah, I think I forgot what I was going to talk about when it came to the white helmets. Oh, wait, that wasn't it. Hold on. And I don't know if I haven't been able to find the actual evidence yet, but I've also heard about how the Israelis apparently created ISIS. I don't know about that. It's possible, and I've heard some other people talk about it as well, but I don't believe I don't right now have the evidence in order to support that. But that's just something I've heard. Alrighty, let's change topics a little bit. A new pot policy for Canadian servicemen. A new cannabis rule is incoming for Canadian Armed Forces member. Will this new regulation be effective? In publishing guidelines by the Canadian Armed Forces on Friday, September 7, 2018, the Canadian military has now opened up its members to the ingestion of cannabis. CTV News reports that following federal and provincial regulations, soldiers will now be able to both consume and possess cannabis, although under newly published military code, certain rules apply to them. One of these examples is that the members of the CAF will not be able to travel by aircraft or vessel with any cannabis, and similarly, they will be prohibited from traveling with cannabis internationally. Speaking to CTV, Chief of Military Personnel Lieutenant General Chuck Lamar, who was instrumental in the foundation and development of new guidelines, explained, "It's really based on how THC cannabis is processed in the body. We feel very confident that 8 hours, 24 hours, and 28 days will ensure that we're operating effective and will ensure that our men and women are ready at all times to do their business." The way it will work, according to Director of Policy, will that the CAF personnel will not be able to ingest cannabis up to 8 hours before any activity duty performance. Moreover, they will not be able to consume up to 24 hours before operating any vehicle or loaded weapon. Additionally, CAF soldiers are prohibited from use any time up to 28 days before joining the crew of a submarine or aircraft. Now, these might be the guidelines that they talk about, but this is not really the case. This is pretty much it's still banned in the military. I know this for a fact. Because a buddy of mine who used to be a big pot smoker ended up recently, he was applying for the Canadian Forces, and so of course, because he had smoked so much, that they were grilling him on that, and he was full out told that when the law is changed and it is legal for consumption, CAF members are still prohibited from using it at any one time. So even right now, with everything that they're talking about, how that it can be used they're just under restrictions for it, that's not true whatsoever. The law, the way that it's going to work is that they will be, is that they're not allowed to smoke it, and because of the military, they can give out random drug tests whenever they want. If you are caught consuming marijuana inside of the inside the military, you will be dishonorably discharged. So this is not actually true for the way that it's being presented. And it's just I thought this was kind of funny. I found this out very recently, and then I started seeing all these articles talking about how all these articles that were talking about how it was going to be allowed when this is just simply not the case whatsoever. All right, so from the Post-Millennial, convicted transgender rapist sexually assaults 4 women inmates after being placed in an all-female jail. Karen White, formerly known as David Thompson, was convicted of raping a woman in 2003 and has also pleaded guilty on 2 similar counts between February and December of 2016. So we're getting into what people have talked about in the past, which has to do with this idea of allowing transgender people to use, for instance, the bathrooms that they choose. It can actually be a dangerous process. And here's the one where someone was sent to an all-female jail because they said they're a transgender woman, and they end up raping them regardless. A transgender prisoner in the UK who is also convicted rapist and pedophile is facing 4 counts of sexual assault on fellow inmates at an all-female prison near Wakefield, West Yorkshire. Karen White, formerly known as David Thompson, was convicted of raping women in 2003 and also pleaded guilty to 2 similar counts between February and December 2016. She was placed under custody of Wakefield Jail for these crimes. When appearing before a judge, Karen claims she could not have committed the assaults as she is not attracted to females and suffers from erectile dysfunction. Among the allegations, Karen White stands accused of indecency, inappropriate comments, physical groping, and kissing a fellow inmate. So this is just to say, don't believe whenever you hear about people who are trying to use the indication that that it's no problem whenever a transgender person just uses whatever bathroom they want, let them identify the way they want. There are real reasons in order to do this. This was literally a rapist who was put into prison over this. Now, they didn't actually specify in the original. It didn't specify in the original article whether she raped a man or a woman, but I'm going on the assumption that it was a woman that she ended up raping. And the other thing I just noticed too is down here is, as it says, while Karen White began identifying as a woman in 2014, friends claim that she does not have gender dysphoria and is a drag artist instead. So she's using this as if this is really the case, and this Karen person ended up trying to use it in order to get into a all-female jail, then this should be an even harsher penalty that's conducted against them because they have lied to a court of law, and it was clear that because they are rapists, they were just trying to get into an all-female prison in order to be able to commit this crime yet again. Alrighty. Let's end on this story now. Last story of the day, everyone. U.S. prosecutor concedes error in sex claims about alleged Russian agent Maria Butina. So this woman here is Maria Butina. If you remember, she was a member of the NRA, and she ended up getting arrested because she was apparently a Russian agent that was trying to use the honeypot in order to get information from U.S. government. Now, the honeypot is that where you sleep with an enemy asset and then they hold that over you in order to manipulate you. So, for instance, in this situation, if she sleeps with them and gets the information they want, and they can't go public about it, they can't report her because they're going to get taken down too. It's a way to keep people silent. But this apparently appears to be absolute bullshit, and a lot of people were using this as the smoking gun when it came to the whole Russian narrative against President Donald Trump. So federal prosecutors are backtracking on their allegations that a Russian woman accused of working as a secret agent offering to trade sex for access, according to Justice Department court filings. Prosecutors had earlier accused Maria Butina, a gun rights activist in the U.S. custody, on charges she worked as a covert agent and tried to establish a back-channel lines of communication to the Kremlin on offering to exchange sex for a position with a special interest organization. The salacious allegation, which immediately escalated the public interest in the case, was based on a series of text messages to and from Butina and other information that prosecutors say they had obtained. But in a new court filing late Friday, prosecutors said, they are misinterpreting the messages. They said even granting that the government's understanding of this particular text conversation was mistaken, there is other evidence to support keeping Butina in custody as the case against her moves forward in Washington. Butina, 29, was arrested in July and accused of gathering intelligence on American officials and political organizations. Prosecutors say she used her contacts with the National Rifle Association and the National Prayer Breakfast to develop a relationship with U.S. politicians and gather information for Russia. They also say she used her role as a student at American University in Washington as a cover for her activities. The case is being handled by the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia and is not by Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who has been leading the investigation into possible coordination between Russia and Donald Trump's Republican presidential campaign, as well as Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. election. The filing came ahead of a status hearing in our case scheduled for Monday. And this should have been the first sign, though, that it really had no real connection to the whole Russiagate situation, is the fact that Mueller wasn't handling this whatsoever, considering Mueller's the one who's going after trying to expose Donald Trump's connection to Russia, which, in my personal opinion, is bullshit. I mean, I think there's at least no reason to deny that Russia tried to influence American elections in some way, because this is what every country does to another, especially the big countries out there who have a strong espionage. They have strong espionage capabilities, such as America or Russia or China. Is that they're going to do whatever they can to try and influence the other elections, but where I think it's bullshit is that Donald Trump actually was colluding with the Russians, that Donald Trump actually was trying to that Donald Trump was actually speaking to the Russians, working with them, and then using them to try and get himself elected as the president of the United States. I did sort of believe it was a possibility when Trump was first elected, but as I've been watching this go down, I just don't see it anymore. After a year and a half, getting close to 2 years of this investigation that's been going on, there's been absolutely nothing that Robert Mueller can pull out as a smoking gun, and any of Trump's, any of the people connected to Trump are not really, have not really been accused of this crime. I mean, for me, Paul Manafort was going to be the one that I thought was going to be the smoking gun, because he has connections to Viktor Yanukovych, and Viktor Yanukovych was the pro-Russian. Viktor Yanukovych was the pro-Russian prime minister of the UK, who ended up getting outed once the riots ended up happening in Ukraine, and then the war ended up happening, the civil war that ended up happening, and then since Russia has annexed Crimea. But I believe what was going on in Ukraine was another proxy war between U.S. and Russia, in that Viktor Yanukovych was the Russian puppet, probably installed there by the influence of Vladimir Putin himself. But then when everything that happened at the outbreak of the Civil War, it was actually America trying to throw its own coup. It was the CIA that had involvement in this and tried to throw their own coup in order to regain control of Ukraine from the Russians, which eventually descended its way into becoming a civil war with the Ukrainians, one side getting backed by America, the other side getting backed by Russia. So this is what I think actually went down in Ukraine, but there was a lot of evidence to support that Paul Manafort did nasty things over there. There was a text message that came out from his daughter, went from one daughter to the next. It ended up getting leaked. That was talking about how the one daughter was saying to the other about all the terrible things that their father did over there, and how he had blood on his hands, how he had probably been responsible for the deaths of many people if he didn't kill anybody directly. So Paul Manafort is an absolute scumbag, and he used to be Trump's campaign manager. So I think that Trump has probably has surrounded himself with many bad people, and that they made the mistake of these businessmen going into politics thinking that there wasn't going to be anything that gets exposed by them, any of their illegal activity. But this idea that Trump actually colluded in person, the narrative to me is just falling apart. People have tried to use the Steele dossier, but the Steele dossier was, first of all, I think it was Christopher Steele was the MI5 agent who ended up presenting the Steele dossier. It ended up being just a load of crap in there, and even Christopher Steele ended up he was seen as an unreliable asset, but we're relying on him in order to present this dossier. And everything is just coming back to also the way that the American government was handling the Trump campaign. For instance, there we have the FISA warrant, which was proving that the U.S. government was spying on Donald Trump's campaign. just a lot of it just seemed like a complete horseshit. Whether you like or hate Trump, it's just we need to get down to the truth, and we'll end up seeing what comes out of it. But I think that at the end of the day, Mueller's going to come up empty-handed when it comes to Trump. There's not going to be any impeachment unless there's one way that there's an impeachment. The same way that they got Richard Nixon. See, what ended up happening with Nixon is that what ended up happening with Nixon was that while he started getting investigated for the Watergate incident, it was actually not so much what took place at Watergate, but what Nixon did afterwards. Because Nixon then was trying to circumvent the whole investigation, and he ended up firing the special counsel. And because of this, it was actually his actions of after the fact that ended up getting him impeached, not the Watergate incident itself. So if Trump was to actually fire Robert Mueller, and he was, then this is probably where people would find the action necessary in order to impeach him, which is why I actually believe that Trump has not fired Mueller yet, because he's threatened to do so many times, but he hasn't done it. I really think the main reason is just because he wanted to and he was planning to, but then someone sat him down and explained to him what would be the outcome of that, and that all he can do is let Mueller go on with his investigation. Because Trump has proven in the past he has no problem firing people, so I just see no reason why he wouldn't fire Mueller if he really wanted to, unless someone explained that to him. He says, if you do this, this will probably lead to your impeachment. But as it stands, it looks like this case against this woman, this Maria Butina, is falling apart because she was supposed to be a Russian agent, but it doesn't seem like that's the situation that's going on. However, she's not been released yet because, as they said, that there's other evidence to support keeping Butina in custody as the case against her moves forward in Washington. So we'll end up seeing what comes out of that. We'll end up seeing what comes out of her. But as it stands, the whole idea of her being a Russian spy is not true. And just every single lead that Mueller seems to get, it seems to fall apart. And that's all I have for you today on the True North Report. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I shall be back soon once again to deliver you the news of the day, the news that the mainstream media doesn't like talking about, and the news that, and giving you a little extra information on the news that you need to know in order to understand what's going on in the world, because despite the fact that a lot of the mainstream media will talk about certain things, there's a lot that they tend to leave out and extra information that they should provide to the people. But the problem is that they don't want to do that because, as the late great George Carlin once said, is that the last thing that the politicians want and the last thing that the mainstream media wants is to have the people sitting around their sitting around their dinner table realizing how badly they're getting fucked. But thank you all for joining me on the True North Report today. I am your friendly neighborhood knucklehead, and I shall see you soon.